Two airport officers thought they were simply handling a suspicious passenger, but what they didn't know was that they had just detained the highest-ranking woman in the FBI, and the entire nation was watching. Her heels echoed steadily across the polished floor of Reagan National Airport, each step purposeful but calm. Veronica Ellison, 53, newly appointed director of the FBI, walked with the quiet presence of someone who knew when to speak and when to observe. No entourage, no fanfare, just her in a sharp slate gray suit, freshly returned from Seattle. She had just endured a red-eye flight, briefings, black coffee, and classified updates. All she craved now was her driver, a hot shower, and a few hours of sleep before the next round of briefings. It was 9:38 p.m. and the sticky air of early summer clung to everything, even inside the terminal. She moved quickly but without urgency, her suit pressed to perfection, designed not for style but for presence. Her shoulder-length hair was neatly pulled back, and in her left hand was the briefcase she never let out of her sight. Inside it, a folder containing documents of such high security clearance that most of the country didn't even know they existed. As she passed Gate 37, her eyes casually scanned the crowd. That's when she saw them. Two airport officers, white, both in their mid-30s, standing near a service kiosk. She didn't make eye contact, but she saw the subtle nudge one gave the other. A silent signal, their eyes now on her. Veronica didn't break stride. Years of experience had taught her when to ignore a glance and when to prepare for trouble. She heard them before she felt them. "Excuse me, ma'am. You traveling alone tonight?" one of the officers asked. She stopped and turned toward them. "Yes." "Can we ask where you're headed?" Her pause wasn't out of fear but calculation. "Is there a problem?" Her voice was measured, soft but firm. The officers looked her up and down. One had a thick Virginia accent while the other stared, his thumb casually near his belt, too close to the button. "You match a description," one of them said. Veronica blinked. "What description?" "Middle-aged black woman, gray suit, briefcase. Maybe carrying sensitive material. We're checking it out." Veronica raised an eyebrow. "You mean I match the description of a federal employee heading home after work?" The taller officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're going to need to take a look at that briefcase." She tightened her grip. "I don't think you understand. I'm Veronica Ellison, director of the FBI." There was a beat of silence. The officer smirked. "Oh yeah?" he said, almost dismissive. "You got any ID to back that up?" Veronica reached into her inner jacket pocket and pulled out her credentials, government issued, with a photo that made her identity unmistakable. She held it out silently. The officer didn't take it. Instead, he glanced at his partner and chuckled. "You can't just wave some badge and expect us to believe you." The crowd had begun to take notice. A teenage girl with earbuds had stopped walking. A woman pushing a stroller gave the officers a long stare. Someone pulled out their phone. "I'm not waving anything," Veronica said, her tone even. "I'm identifying myself, as is protocol." "Protocol's not your call tonight," the second officer said. "We're taking you in for questioning. You can explain everything downtown." Veronica didn't flinch, but her lips pressed together. She glanced at the growing crowd, the cameras, and the fear creeping into the edges of her breath. "Call the Homeland Security liaison," she said, her voice steady. "Or, better yet, call your supervisor, right now." But the officers didn't move. Instead, one of them reached for her briefcase. She took a step back. "Do not touch that. You have no authority to search it." "Hands where I can see them!" The command was sharp, loud, and public. It hit her like a slap. The officers stepped in closer, crowding her. She didn't resist, but she didn't help them either. Her body remained still, her voice clear. "You're making a mistake." They didn't listen. The taller officer grabbed her arm and pulled it behind her back. The other officer unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The briefcase slipped from her fingers, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. People gasped, phones went up. But the officers didn't look around. They were locked in. She was officially detained. One call, just one, was about to change everything. Veronica didn't resist as the cold metal of the cuffs pressed into her wrists. She didn't lower her eyes. She stood tall, handcuffed. surrounded by a silence that felt heavier than the cuffs themselves. The taller officer leaned in. "You got the right to remain silent," he muttered, almost inaudible, as if even he didn't believe what he was saying. "Do you know what you're doing?" Veronica asked, her voice unwavering. "You're unlawfully detaining a federal official on U.S. soil." The younger officer, his name tag reading M. Landry, snorted. "Ma'am, we're trying to keep this airport safe. You being combative doesn't help your case." But Veronica was far from done. A small circle of onlookers had formed around the scene, cameras raised like shields. Veronica didn't spare them a glance. Her eyes were locked on the officers in front of her. "I've shown you federal ID," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "I've told you who I am. I'm not resisting. But if you continue this without contacting your superior or verifying my credentials, you're walking into something neither of you is prepared to handle." "Ma'am, you're done talking," Landry responded, motioning toward a nearby bench. She was escorted, still cuffed, and seated harshly. Her briefcase remained on the floor, abandoned and ignored. Her blazer was slightly askew, one shoulder pulled down, and a button torn off in the struggle. From the crowd, a woman called out, "Y'all really arresting the FBI director?" The taller officer, Devin, returned and pointed. "Keep walking." This only drew more attention. Whispers turned into murmurs. Phones were still recording. One of the officers muttered, "Get her ID." Landry reached down, picking up the badge and credentials that had fallen to the ground. He stared at them, his jaw moving slightly as he flipped through the documents, his fingers hesitating on the details. "Ah, Devin," he whispered. "What? Does it look real?" Devin asked, walking over to snatch the badge from Landry's hand. He inspected it. Photo, raised seal, clearance strip, then back at Veronica's face. "Where'd you get this?" he asked, but this time, the bark in his voice had disappeared. "I didn't get it," Veronica replied calmly, locking eyes with him. "It was issued to me after a 28-year career in law enforcement, the same career that probably trained the people who trained you." For the first time, there was hesitation in Devin's demeanor. Landry shifted nervously, uncomfortable under the pressure. "You could have just said that," Veronica added. "I did say it 5 minutes ago, then I showed you proof, but you didn't care. You decided what you wanted to believe." Landry's eyes scanned the growing crowd, clearly unsettled. TSA agents were nearby, hovering. A janitor had stopped mopping and was watching quietly. Before Devin could respond, his walkie-talkie crackled to life. "Terminal B security, we've got DHS inbound on site. Code 542, agents en route." Devin froze, looking at Landry. "What's 542? Landry swallowed. "High priority personnel mishandling." Suddenly, Veronica's earlier words landed with full impact. Her expression hadn't changed, but she leaned back slightly, her silence speaking volumes. Landry fumbled with the keys to her handcuffs, dropping them once before picking them up again. "This is just protocol, ma'am," he muttered quietly. She rubbed her wrists, meeting his gaze. "You need to stop saying, Mom, like it cancels out everything you just did." Devin reached for her briefcase to return it, but she didn't take it. "You don't touch classified materials without clearance." He froze, his hand hovering in midair, and for a moment the hallway felt like it was holding its breath. Veronica stood up, adjusted her blazer, and locked eyes with both officers. "You better hope your chain of command is more prepared than you are." But it was already too late. The real agents were on their way. Standing alone in the terminal, Veronica wasn't flanked by agents or press. She was surrounded by silence, a raw, heavy silence. Her hands were free now, but the marks from the cuffs were visible, red outlines around each wrist. She flexed her fingers once, then again. She didn't wince, but she felt it. The officers were visibly nervous. Devin wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Landry kept shifting from foot to foot, mumbling to himself. They weren't saying much anymore. There was nothing left to say. The terminal had gone from curious to tense. People were recording, not secretly, but openly. They weren't just documenting. They were waiting to see what she would do next. Veronica picked up her briefcase, dusted it off, and locked the latch. Then a voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, officers. What exactly is going on here?" A man in his early 60s, black with graying hair and the posture of someone who'd served most of his life, stepped forward. He wore a worn denim jacket, his eyes sharp despite his appearance. "This woman says she's the FBI director," he said, his voice carrying. "And I know for a fact that she is. I watched her on CS-PAN just last week testifying before the Judiciary Committee." Landry opened his mouth, but the man raised his hand. "No, don't talk, just listen. Y'all dragged her down like she stole something. And I guarantee you, she's got more clearance in her left pocket than both of you got in your whole careers." Veronica gave him a small nod, not of thanks, but of recognition. It was a gesture between two people who understood the unspoken rules of a game most people didn't even know existed. Landry didn't respond. Devin turned and walked a few paces away, pretending to adjust his radio. Then another voice interrupted. A Latina woman in her early 40s wearing a Navy uniform and a TSA supervisor badge. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," she said softly to Veronica. "They didn't inform us of any detention. We had no idea." Veronica's voice was calm. "You don't need to apologize for their mistake." The TSA agent turned to the officers, her voice sharp. "You detained a high-level federal official without contacting oversight." Devin tried to speak, but she cut him off. Veronica's voice rang out loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "I complied. I identified myself. I showed credentials. I didn't raise my voice, didn't resist, and I asked them to call for verification. They refused." The TSA agent looked stunned. "We're going to need a report immediately." But before anyone could respond, another voice rang out, firm and no nonsense. "Director Ellison?" Two agents in dark suits moved through the crowd quickly, one with an earpiece and the other with a badge that caught the light. Behind them, two more agents followed, speaking into radios. Their jackets read Department of Homeland Security. The lead agent reached Veronica first. "Are you all right, ma'am?" "I'm fine," she said, but her gaze was unwavering. The agent turned toward the officers who had put hands on her. Devin tried to explain, but the agent interrupted, his tone commanding. "Stand down, right now." Landry looked like he wanted to sink into the floor, his eyes flicking from the cameras to his shoes. Homeland agents moved swiftly. One took a statement from the TSA supervisor, while another confirmed Veronica's identity with a secondary biometric scan. The atmosphere in the terminal shifted again. This time, heavier, quieter, like the end of a long argument when someone realizes they were wrong all along. "I want security footage pulled from this concourse," the lead DHS agent said, his voice steady. "All angles. I want the body cam data from both of these officers. And I want someone from Internal Affairs waiting for them when they clock out," Devin muttered under his breath. "This is crazy." "No," the older black man on the sideline said, his voice firm. "What's crazy is you thought you could treat her like just another black woman and nobody would notice." A heavy silence followed. Veronica stood tall, adjusting the strap on her briefcase. "I'd like to leave now." The DHS agent nodded. "Of course. We'll escort you to your vehicle." She didn't look back at the officers, didn't pause for the cameras. She simply walked forward. But her silence wasn't forgiveness, and they knew it. The walk from the terminal to the black SUV parked outside felt longer than it should have. Veronica remained silent, her DHS escort walking carefully beside her, never asking questions, never trying to fill the quiet. He didn't need to. Inside the vehicle, Agent Sonia Del Vecchio was already waiting, sharp, composed, and no nonsense. She had been Veronica's detail lead since her Senate confirmation. Her voice was low and tight as she spoke. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" "No," Veronica replied, her tone neutral. "But I'm tired." Sonia glanced at her wrists and saw the red markings left by the handcuffs. She looked away. "I filed an emergency notice the second we got word. The terminals are swarming with press now. There are already 3 different video angles circulating." Veronica didn't flinch. "Let them circulate." Sonia nodded slowly. "They're scrambling to do damage control. Internal Affairs has already quarantined the officers." Veronica gave a small shake of her head. They'll learn. That's not my concern right now. Sonia's voice softened. That's the third time in 4 months, Director. First, the elevator at Quantico. Then the background check mix-up before the Denver meeting. Now this. Veronica finally looked over at her. I keep receipts, Sonia. This one just happened to come with video. As the SUV pulled away from the terminal, the silence between them returned. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. The weight of history, the burden of constant proof. It wasn't new, it was just louder now. Halfway down George Washington Memorial Parkway, Veronica's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered. Director Ellison? The voice on the other end was gravelly, older. This is Judge Harlan Bixby. I'm calling from Arlington. Yes, sir. I saw the video. You handled that with restraint. Most people don't have that kind of composure. Just wanted you to know, some of us saw it for what it was. Thank you, Your Honor. And if it matters, he added, my grandson just told me you're the first public official he's ever respected. Kid's 13. I thought you might want to hear that. Veronica exhaled, the first real breath she'd taken in hours. That does matter, more than you know. She ended the call and stared out the window, watching as the city lights blurred past. Outside, the night rolled on like nothing had happened. Inside, something had changed. The weight wasn't hers anymore. Back at the airport, things were unraveling fast. DHS agents had cordoned off the area near Gate 37. Reporters were being held behind makeshift barriers. Airport PR officials scrambled with scripted statements. The two officers, Devon and Landry, were separated and seated in opposite corners of the staff security room. Landry had his head in his hands. Devon paced, fists clenching and unclenching. You think we're done? Landry whispered. Devon didn't answer. The door opened, and a federal investigator walked in. No greeting, just a voice like gravel and ice. Both of you will remain off-duty, effective immediately. Your badges and service weapons are suspended pending formal inquiry. You are not to speak to the media. The investigator's voice was firm, cutting through the tension in the room. You are not to contact the director in any way. Is that understood? Landry nodded, defeated. Devon scoffed, but said nothing. The investigator placed 2 sealed folders on the table in front of them. You'll each have the opportunity to give your version, but let me be clear, this isn't going away. The woman you disrespected is not just the director of the FBI. She is a decorated federal servant with more counterterrorism clearances than the two of you have years in uniform, and the entire nation is watching. Landry whispered. We didn't mean... The investigator cut him off, his voice steady. But you did, and that's the point. Back in the SUV, Veronica sat in silence. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her goddaughter in Florida. I'm so proud of you. Don't let them break you. They're not ready for you. Veronica closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Sonia. Yes, ma'am? Sonia responded, her voice calm and steady. Schedule a press briefing for tomorrow morning. Call the Bureau's media unit. I'll write the statement myself. But what Veronica planned to say wasn't just for the cameras. It was for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., Veronica stood behind a sleek podium in the FBI's press room in Washington, D.C. The seal behind her gleamed under the lights. Cameras lined the back of the room, and reporters shifted in their seats, quiet but buzzing with anticipation. Everyone wanted to hear her version of the incident that now had over 6 million views across 3 platforms. She wasn't wearing anger. She wasn't wearing pain. She wore a deep navy suit, ironed smooth, not a thread out of place, controlled, deliberate, no teleprompter. She looked out across the room. Let's not waste time, she began. You've seen the footage. She paused. I was detained at Reagan National Airport last night by 2 uniformed officers. I was questioned, ignored, handcuffed, and accused of impersonating a federal official despite identifying myself clearly and providing credentials. My words were dismissed. Her hands rested on the podium, not gripping it, just placed there. This is not the first time something like this has happened to me. It may not be the last, but it wasn't just about me. It was about how easy it still is in 2025 to see a black woman in a suit and not imagine FBI, but instead imagine a problem. She let that hang in the air for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. My response today isn't about revenge. I don't want those officers destroyed. I want them educated. I want the system that trained them to stop teaching suspicion over service. The room was still. No one rustled a notebook, no fingers typed. I'm not asking for apologies. I already got those. On their knees in front of strangers when they realized who I was. But that kind of regret doesn't come from conscience. It comes from consequence. And if our society only learns after being shamed, she continued, her voice growing firmer, then we are still failing. She stepped back from the mic, signaling the end of her statement. I'll take a few questions. Hands shot up. The first reporter asked, Director Ellison, do you believe race played a role in what happened last night? Veronica looked straight at him. If I'd been wearing the same suit, carrying the same briefcase, speaking with the same authority, but had a different face, then I believe I would have made it to my car in 5 minutes flat. Next question, the reporter said quickly, trying to steer the conversation. Do you plan to press charges? No, she said calmly. Because I want systemic change, not personal punishment. What happened to me is part of a pattern. I didn't make the pattern, but I've lived in it. And I'm not here to break two links. I'm here to melt the chain. One final question came. How are you personally feeling today? Veronica's answer was short but powerful. Angry but focused. She walked off without waiting for more. Later that day, the two officers were summoned to a private meeting inside the Department of Justice. Not for discipline yet, but for dialogue. Veronica chose to meet them herself. No cameras, no staff. Just her and them in a plain conference room with a long table and a pitcher of water. Devin sat stiffly, arms folded. Landry looked like he hadn't slept. Veronica entered, no suit jacket, just her shirt sleeves rolled up, a folder in hand. She didn't sit. Let's talk, she said, her tone calm but direct. They glanced at each other. I'm not here to yell, she continued. I don't need to make a scene, but I want you to understand what you actually did yesterday. She opened the folder and pulled out a photo. This is me at age 30, my first day at Quantico. She laid down another photo. This is me after making my first arrest. She tapped another photo. This is my father, a civil rights attorney who spent his whole life arguing that systems could change. She looked up at them and her voice was steady. And yesterday you told him he was wrong. Landry lowered his eyes. Devin swallowed hard. You thought I was a threat because I didn't fit the image in your heads of what power looks like, she said, pausing. But here's the truth. Power doesn't look like one thing. It doesn't sound like one accent. And it damn sure doesn't only walk around in one color. They didn't speak. Maybe they couldn't. Veronica stepped back, collected her folder, and looked at them one last time. You made a choice based on assumptions. That's human. But if you wear a badge, being human isn't enough. You have to be better than your instincts. She walked out, but the lesson she left behind would last longer than any punishment ever could. By noon, the headlines were everywhere. FBI director confronts officers in closed-door meeting. Veronica Ellison speaks without anger, delivers with impact. Clips of her speech played on repeat. Talk shows debated every word, and civil rights leaders called it a turning point. Her face, stoic, composed, unsmiling, became a symbol, not of victimhood, but of control. Yet Veronica didn't stay in the spotlight. She returned to work, quietly and without fanfare. She didn't grant interviews or appear on nightly news panels. She wasn't interested in becoming a moment. She wanted the moment to mean something. In the days that followed, the Department of Justice announced a new training initiative led by Ellison herself, focused on identification protocols, bias response, and officer discretion. A quiet revolution was already in motion, subtle, deliberate, but powerful. She received hundreds of messages from strangers, fellow officers, and parents who had shown their kids her press conference and said, "That's how you carry yourself." But one letter stood out. It came in a plain white envelope handwritten with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Dear Director Ellison, I watched what happened at the airport. I'm a retired police officer, white, grew up in Ohio. I've spent most of my life thinking racism was something ugly in other people, not me. I now realize how wrong I've been. The way you stood there, how you spoke, it didn't make me angry, it made me ashamed. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man I thought I already was. Thank you. Veronica kept that letter in her desk drawer. She never showed it to anyone. She didn't need to. Meanwhile, the two officers, Devon and Landry, were reassigned to desk duty, undergoing mandatory review. The press moved on, but their names, for a while, were etched into public memory. Landry later requested to join one of the Bureau's new training pilots. Devon didn't. Their paths were already splitting, even if they didn't realize it yet. Back inside the Bureau, Veronica sat at her desk scanning over files. A knock at the door. Sonia stepped in. Your next appointment's here. A group of high school students from a civics program in Arlington. They're early. Veronica stood. Good. Let's not waste their time. She stepped into the hallway where 20 students stood, some whispering, others staring wide-eyed. One boy near the front, tall and lanky with freckles, blurted out, "You really took down 2 cops just by talking?" She smiled faintly. "That's not what I did." Another student raised a hand. "So, what did you do?" Veronica looked at them. She didn't give a speech. She didn't quote the law. She simply said, "I made them see me. Not the version they made up in their heads, just me. That's all any of us really wants." The room fell quiet. "I know the world will try to make you smaller and you're going to be misunderstood a lot, but don't let it harden you. Let it shape you. That's how you lead." Afterward, one of the students asked to take a photo. Veronica agreed. As they stood together, he whispered, "My mom's a bus driver. She cried watching your speech." Veronica nodded. "Tell her I said thank you." She walked them out herself, one hand resting loosely at her side, the other on the briefcase that had once hit the floor of an airport. That briefcase hadn't changed, but everyone else had. And just like that, the lesson was no longer hers alone. It belonged to anyone willing to listen. Later that evening, long after the building had emptied and the halls grew quiet, Veronica stayed behind. Her office light was the only one still glowing on the 8th floor. She sat with her blazer draped over the back of the chair, sleeves rolled up, reading glasses in one hand, a folder in the other. Not a single noise interrupted her focus, except the soft hum of the air system and the occasional click of a file being turned. But her mind wasn't really in those files, not anymore. Her eyes drifted to a photo frame on her desk, a black and white shot of her at 23, standing on the steps outside the FBI Academy at Quantico. That was the day her mother called, crying. "You really did it," she'd said. "You really kicked the damn door down." Veronica hadn't cried that day. Not then. She was too focused on proving it wasn't a fluke. But she remembered what it felt like walking those halls during her first week. The tight knots in her stomach, eyes on her back, people calling her Ellison like it was a challenge instead of a name. Her shoes were scuffed, her salary small, but she moved like someone who belonged, because she had to. There had been whispers, cold shoulders, even outright disrespect in classrooms. One instructor had once accidentally skipped over her name during firearm certification. She corrected him, loud and clear. He never skipped it again. She carried all of that quietly, year after year. There were nights she doubted if it was worth it. Nights she went home, kicked off her heels, and sat on the floor just to feel grounded. But every setback, every insult, every time someone talked over her in a meeting, she stored it. Not to get even, but to get here. Her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder for 6:45 a.m. Breakfast meeting with the task force committee. She silenced it, then opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside, neatly stacked, were files from her earliest cases: gang violence investigations in Kansas City, missing persons from northern Nevada, a counterintelligence sting in El Paso that nobody believed she could lead, until she did. And underneath them all, folded neatly, was a letter from her father. He wrote it on the day she became deputy director. It read, "They will test you. They will question how you got here. Make them question how they ever thought you couldn't." She read it twice, then closed the drawer. There was nothing sentimental about the way she worked. She didn't operate on pride. She didn't need the world's approval. But every so often, in the stillness of an empty office, she let herself remember, not out of nostalgia, but to remind herself how much had been taken from women like her in silence, and how much louder her presence had become because she stayed. At 11:18 p.m., she finally stood. She put on her blazer, clicked off the light, and locked the door behind her. The corridor lights cast long shadows as she walked toward the elevator. The click of her heels echoed against the marble floors. When the doors slid shut behind her, she let out a single, quiet breath. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stood there, head high, shoulders square, director of the FBI, and no one could take that from her now. What they saw in an airport didn't define her, but what she did next, that's what history would remember.